Good afternoon, fellow CITers, SUNY friends, and colleagues. My name is Kim McCoy Coleman, and I'm an assistant professor of social work at SUNY Plattsburgh, our campus EAP coordinator, a critical clinical social worker, and an art therapist. I'm also the former BSW program director, a distinction which is now held by Dr. Akanksha Anand. It's my pleasure to be with you today for the next 30 minutes to share with you a little bit about how a small SUNY comprehensive in New York State's North Country managed to launch the first fully online SUNY Bachelor of Science in Social Work BSW program with inclusion and mental health in mind. Before we begin, a few statements of acknowledgement and gratitude. First of all, I'm speaking to you from our campus, which is situated on land that belongs to the Iroquois, Western Abenaki, Mohican, and Mohawk peoples. This land and nearby Lake Champlain was inhabited and nurtured by these people for thousands of years. The SUNY community is one of active learners. Although I'm a member of that community, I can all too easily become too busy to attend to what's really important. I pledge today that as a small but necessary step to fight against systemic indigenous erasure, I will strive to learn more about the history of the land my campus is situated on and of the people who it was stolen from. I invite you to do the same. Secondly, I'd like to acknowledge myself as a white settler who identifies as queer and female. I'm also disabled or differently abled with what the medical establishment refers to as mental health disorders. Therefore, my views shared with you today are filtered through this lived experience, my own. I intend to speak with you today with honesty and compassion about a topic that's near and dear to me: social work, social inclusion, and mental health, and how we might work together to support the mental health of our online students and of each other. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to acknowledge that the recent full CSWE reaccreditation, the success and growth of our program, particularly the online initiative beginning this fall and our recent approved plan to build an online MSW program, have been made possible by the hard work and dedication of a community of people that I have had the privilege to work with every day. These are just a few of them. Thank you to everybody. Here is an overview of today's presentation. I'd like to start by giving you a bit of a rationale for launching a fully online BSW program. And then I will mention a few comments about the theoretical lens that inspires the work that we've done here at SUNY Plattsburgh. Following that, in the next two sections, I'll talk about the how of what we've done: social inclusion and mental health. I'll share with you my views on how social inclusion and mental health have informed the development and design of our online BSW program. I would like to generate a discussion at that point and to have each other share what you have done to support student mental health or what you hope to do in the near future. Okay, so here we go. The who, what, where, when, and why. SUNY Plattsburgh, nestled in the Adirondack region of upstate New York, an hour south of Montreal, in fall of 2022, this fall, we'll be receiving our first cohort of students into the first ever SUNY, fully accredited by the Council on Social Work Education, entirely online BSW 2-year completion program. We're delivering the same BSW program that we've been delivering since the early 1990s, but in a fully online format. Students will take the same classes that our face-to-face students must take, but will have the added benefit of not being bound by geographic or scheduling restrictions. Students will develop their own local internship placements or choose one from an expanded network of a variety of agencies and community organizations from across the state. Right now, most students are tending to be from various areas in New York State, but there's nothing preventing us from admitting students from any state in the country, with the very real possibility of accepting international students from abroad. particularly in light of our new Global Social Action Certificate program. After receiving a full reaffirmation of our accreditation in the spring of 2021, our program was able to reflect on where we had come and where we wanted to go, in essence, our identity. Faced with the challenge of being smack dab in the middle of a federally designated mental health professional and healthcare provider shortage area, we decided to focus on dismantling barriers to education for those who would not otherwise be able to come to Plattsburgh or enroll in face-to-face classes. Also, like many communities and campuses, Plattsburgh has also worked hard to try to overcome the challenges of being a primarily white institution during a time of transformational racial justice. Social justice is at the very core of the social work mission. In light of this, improving access to education, diversifying the social work workforce, and building a more robust mental health provider pool in rural communities became the driving force of our program expansion efforts. In fact, recent research evidence has demonstrated that online learning and social work does indeed contribute to creating a more diverse workforce. Additionally, we were told by our community partners early in the COVID pandemic that telehealth was here to stay in a big way. In fact, today it's estimated that 25% of all mental health clients in the North Country are still receiving telehealth services. We thought that teaching online would help promote knowledge and skill development for our students in actually learning how to practice social work online. There can often be sometimes contentious debate about whether we can effectively teach clinical or people skills in an online platform. Recent research evidence is beginning to demonstrate that these skills can be taught just as effectively in online learning environments as they can be in person. Although these noble and lofty goals are important and are really at the heart of why we're doing what we're doing, there are also very practical matters that might ring true to you where you're at. The first is the ever intensifying focus on student recruitment and retention, the changing face of higher education, and the desire to leverage the hard work that our faculty has done in the great pivot to online learning. So this is a bit about the who, what, where, when, and why of what we're doing. In a minute, we'll get to the how, but first I'd like to say a few words about two theories that inform what we're doing. Trauma-informed care and self-determination theory are at the core of our program expansion and online two-year BSW program efforts. Trauma-informed care is an approach to practicing social work and an approach to teaching that's essential to our times. The University Buffalo, shout out to my own hometown of Buffalo, has blazed the trail in trauma-informed care. Whether you recognize the need for trauma-informed care in light of the COVID-19, racial justice, or gun violence pandemics, just to name a few that are gripping our nation, or if you simply acknowledge that we all have or will experience trauma of some sort or another, trauma-informed care is a must-know for all educators, regardless of your discipline. This slide shows the 5 pillars of trauma-informed care. These pillars will be evident in the how of what we're doing when I start moving into talking about social inclusion and mental health. But take a minute to just look at these 5 pillars: physical and emotional safety, individual choice, collaboration, trustworthiness, and empowerment. We found that these 5 pillars are so digestible and strengths-based that it's quite easy to keep them all in mind in everything we do for our students and with each other. In essence, these 5 pillars inform both program policy, everyday practices, and are the foundation of how we design and implement our explicit and implicit curriculum. I would invite you to familiarize yourself with these 5 principles and take a look at the exciting expertise that UB has to offer. And perhaps jot these down and set them somewhere close to your workspace so you can begin to internalize them into your instruction methods as we have. Self-determination theory. First of all, self-determination is a core social work value, but it's also a very useful theory to guide your teaching. Self-determination theory suggests that all individuals possess 3 universal and psychological needs: autonomy, feeling self-governed and felt self-endorsed; competence, feeling competent and effective; and relatedness, feeling connected, loved, and interacted with. These psychological needs move people to act or not to act. Individuals experience greater psychological well-being through the satisfaction of these 3 psychological needs, and conversely, feel highly fragmented, isolated, and reactive when their needs are not met. When pedagogical design adequately addresses these psychological needs, students are actively motivated to engage in learning. Classrooms that support these 3 psychological needs are more likely to engage students in learning, whether those classrooms are online or face-to-face. With these theories as a backdrop, let's talk about the ways that we've tried to build our online program with inclusion and mental health in mind. In other words, the how of what we're doing. So, social inclusion. Our program recognizes the overwhelming evidence that supports the importance of belonging to our sense of well-being. I'm sure many of you are familiar with happiness research. There's a great resource online called the Happiness Lab that summarizes a lot of the evidence base out there. But happiness research continuously demonstrates that the key to a happy life is a sense of belonging and a practice of gratitude. We've built inclusion, social inclusion, into our program in a few ways. First of all, we've decided as a faculty to adopt an inclusion statement as a core component of all our class syllabi. I'll give you a minute to take a look at this inclusivity statement that is on all of our class syllabi. We believe that this sets the tone and acknowledges the importance of inclusion to our program, to our students, and to each other. It communicates our responsibility to take a rights-based approach to learning and provides documented common ground in all of our coursework. Secondly, we've developed a tool called Community Guidelines. I'll give you a minute to read these over, and then I'll say a few words about how these guidelines really helps to create inclusion and to promote positive mental health. Our faculty has agreed to begin each course, the first day of class of each course, to take the necessary time and space to create community guidelines with our students designated to dismantle oppression in our online or face-to-face classrooms. As a mental health therapist, I can appreciate how valuable it is to take the time to delimit the structural and relational framework within which I work with clients. For example, in therapy, it's the very first session that you meet with a client when the therapist usually talks about confidentiality, the limits of confidentiality, informed consent, roles, and expectations. The better this is done at the very beginning, the more freedom there is in the shared journey ahead. I've found the same to be true for the online or face-to-face classes. Taking the time upfront on day one to generate agreement, to individualize these guidelines to each unique group of student learners, and to level the playing field by being clear about mutual respect and shared expectations will pave the way for freedom to think, learn, critique, and create. I also would recommend, and something that I practice with my students, is to really allow these respectful spaces and these guidelines to be reciprocal. I invite my students to bring things to my attention when I use words that can be offensive, when my examples tend to be heteronormative or female centered. I try to diversify the examples that I give to students, but I really invite them to identify when I can be doing a better job, and I elicit their agreement that I can do that in kind to them. So it's really a shared space of helping each other to grow and expand and become better humans, um, in this trusting and respectful space that these guidelines can really help create. We also encourage our faculty, as I did in the beginning of this presentation, to share their intersectional identities with students to the degree that they're comfortable. This can help to reinforce diversity, to recognize difference, to destigmatize various dimensions of our identity, and to foster an atmosphere of compassion and inclusion. Okay, let's talk a bit more about mental health, which is very related to social inclusion. The first rule of mental health in teaching is that supporting student mental health must begin with taking care of your own mental health. I'm sure many of you are now familiar with the analogy that everyone that many people refer to in terms of mental health and self-care. That the airplane analogy, that you need to secure your own mask before helping another person to secure theirs. It's the introduction to airline safety that everyone who's flown is familiar with. And this analogy is really perfect for talking about student mental health, because you really need to radically internalize that your own mental health as a staff, faculty, um, community, campus member is primary. If your mental health is not in a good place, you're not going to be able to support the mental health of students. So please use this as permission to put your mental health first. Secondly, we believe that more bachelor's programs need to teach students about trauma. This can take the form of an entire class, or it can be a module about trauma, regardless of your discipline. Graduate programs are actually starting to teach trauma to all students, regardless of what your major is or what program you're in. However, we've seen very little of this at the bachelor's level. Teaching about trauma helps students because all students, regardless of level of education, are going to enter the workforce and come into contact people who have experienced trauma. Individuals in all career fields will interact with people who have experienced trauma and may have limited, if any, trauma training. Carnevale and Rose found that bachelor's degree workers comprise over 50% of the economic value in the United States. Therefore, a need for trauma and crisis education is evident for students at the undergraduate level, regardless of major. Indeed, an undergraduate course or a online learning module in trauma can serve many purposes, including preparing students to encounter individuals that have experienced trauma. In other words, how to recognize, relate, and refer. It can also help them to prepare for challenges that they may experience in their personal lives or their future academic pursuits or professional endeavors. It can also remind us as educators, those teaching the modules on trauma, how to remain sensitive to the needs of traumatized students and how to support mental health in online teaching. One thing that you may have heard of before, which bears repeating, is that all instructors in online learning should spend a bit of time learning how to recognize, respond, and refer students who are experiencing mental health difficulties. At the end of the presentation, and I'd be happy to share this with anyone who requests, there's some resources on the last few slides that are short video clips that will provide some guidance on how to recognize mental health concerns, how to reach out, relate, and respond to those concerns, and how to refer students to appropriate community or national resources. Another thing to consider is this idea of work-life balance that many of us hear about these days and online learning. I'd like to challenge you to consider deleting the online balancing act or work-life balance vocabulary and think about it more as a work-life integration. Balancing act can be kind of scary. You know, it's pretty hard to be on balance. And if you do achieve balance, it's only a matter of time before things are out of balance again. So I'd like you to think about integrating life and wellness activities, things that are important to us, into your work, or helping students to integrate those components into online learning. Life is work, and helping students to understand and how to navigate life is an essential part of learning how to be successful in living and learning and living a happy life. So think of work-life balance as more of an integration rather than a balancing act. I'd like to say a few more words and then ask for some ideas of ways that you've helped students feel socially included and ways that you've supported their mental health. Um, a few last minute thoughts about mental health and inclusion before asking for your suggestions. I want to just suggest something to you that you may have thought of throughout this COVID pandemic, and that is how fraught the term self-care is. Research has continually shown that the best kind of self-care, the things that you do that really matter to your mental health, is being in relationship with other people. This means we need to carve out time to tend to our own relationships, personal and professional relationships. Work can feel, in fact, for me, it does feel very demanding, even though things are lightening up in terms of COVID. And oftentimes, the things that are very important but not urgent get bumped to the bottom of our to do list. And one of the most important things that you can do is to carve out time and make time investing in your personal and professional relationships. For those of you that are familiar with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, Covey's quadrants, or quadrant number 2, is where you're supposed to focus on the most. These are the important but not urgent tasks, and relationship building and strengthening falls under quadrant 2. So please recognize that investing in relationships with your students is supporting their mental health. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to advance there. I'd like to ask for you to share with us some ways that you've worked to promote social inclusion or to support positive mental health in your students. And I'd like to invite you to write your responses in the discussion forum. And our moderator, Chris, will help read those aloud. If you can share ways that you've helped to support student mental health.
Feel free to type your stuff in the discussion forum. If you're watching live in our room here at SUNY Oswego, you should be able to do that as well. Our facilitator, Kaylee, can help you with that.
Okay, thank you.
Jonelle has a question while we're waiting. She
Sure.
asks, is
Mhm.
telehealth billed in the same way as other appointments in general?
Telehealth billing. Ooh, that's a specific question. I believe that billing is. There have been special regulations put out by New York State, I know, that allow for billing to be done and telehealth to be provided and covered in just the same way that face-to-face services are. Um, I don't know where that policy stands right now, but in certainly throughout the COVID pandemic, that has been the case. Um, thank you for that question. Happy to answer questions as well, other additional questions you might have.
Yeah, Janelle also says, I think the idea of having a trauma module is a fantastic idea.
Thank you. Thank you. And I at the end I'll make a suggestion to collaborate, but please reach out to myself. If you have a social work department or a psychology department at your campus, to our campus, I would love to be invited to collaborate on creating a shared module about trauma. This is my area of interest and expertise. So putting together a module for me is kind of fun and exciting and second nature, where people from other disciplines can feel very intimidated about having to speak to something that they're less familiar with. So use this as an opportunity to reach out interdisciplinary wise and collaborate. Okay. Um, Chris, please feel free to share with me other questions or suggestions that come through. But in the interest of time, I want to close with a few thoughts as we wrap things up here. Remember that things that you do with your students in online learning to support their mental health are more often than not reciprocal in their effect. So if you build in things into your teaching to support mental health of your students, what you're actually doing is helping your own mental health. It's a two-way street. It's not A impacts B. It's a reciprocal exchange. So keep in mind, doing for your students is often doing for yourself. Also, remember that resilience, unlike the olden days when we thought that that was an individual trait, resilience is actually built. And I've passed around my phone with students in classes. I've invited online students to enter my phone number into their cell phone, and I've sort of asked their permission to become part of their social support network as a way to support them. Just identifying myself as a resource for them can really send a positive message. As an art therapist, I want to encourage everyone, even if you're not familiar with art, to either reach out to colleagues or experiment a little bit and to incorporate some art based assignments in your courses. Art is therapy. You don't have to talk about how therapeutic it is, but if you incorporate the arts into your assignments, often that has a self regulatory, anxiety reducing effect just because it's outside the normal academic prose and requirements. Okay. I'd like to invite everyone to email me. If you would like a copy of the slides, I can get those to you as well as any of the resources that were used in today's presentation. Also, the slides do have some embedded resources and other ideas about things you can do um, in your courses right away to help promote well-being, to support social inclusion, and to support positive mental health for your students. Feel free to email me at any time. And if you're interested in collaborating, either in writing or having a bi-monthly meeting, okay, please reach out. I would love to collaborate on how we can work together to support our students' mental health. There's a lot written about how poor their mental health is, and not a lot out there yet on how to improve it in the online learning environment. Thank you for your attention and participation today. I wish you a great rest of the conference and mental health to you all.